Hello, internets. Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds. I am Nerdarchist Ted, and tonight I am joined by this guy.
Nerder Doug.
I never get used to pointing in the opposite direction when I see you.
And I'm sure it's opposite, so let's see. I would have to point there.
Nah. So, how are you doing this fine and lovely evening, minus the lovely technical issues that we're dealing with?
Yeah, great. Yeah, we had the audio thing with here, and then there was some website stuff, but we are here, so I'm doing well. And we got the other things resolved too, so I'm doing extra well.
We're here, and tonight we're supposed to be talking about puzzles, huh?
Yep, that's the rumor.
So
that would be a good topic too.
How often would you say that you actually use puzzles in your game?
Very rarely. I was racking my brain all day. Like, do I? If I do, they're usually more like I'll just say there's I'll just describe a situation. I have no puzzle in mind. I just let the players try different things until they do something that sounds cool. So I never have like devised puzzles or anything like that.
So very rarely is this something that comes up in my games as well. But as you know, number one, I did use one in my game this past weekend, and I did have a formulaic structure. There was a set win condition, for lack of a better word. There was definitely this is what you have to do to solve this puzzle. And when you and I were talking earlier today, and you're like, I don't really use puzzles all that often. Are we going to get a full hour out of this? I started thinking like, all right, how do we approach this situation? So I decided I'd, reach out to, our lovely internet out there. And you got to first off look at the definition. It says a game, toy, or problem designed to test ingenuity or knowledge. So ingenuity, intelligence, knowledge, you can test that pretty easily. So anytime you're looking to really get into the exploration pillar, you can play around with puzzles without actually having to, here's a problem, solve it, go.
Okay, now you're talking my language.
So technically, based on the way I'm looking at this, a skill challenge falls into the realm of a puzzle.
Okay, well now we're talking.
So that opens things up to a lot more options. Now, if you don't happen to support us on Patreon, you wouldn't have seen our talk last night where we talked about all of the things that happened in our games that happened this past weekend. And in mine, I did do a game, or I did do a puzzle. I devised, 10 of these little statues that had dragon busts on them, and they represented the 5 chromatics and the 5 metallic dragons, and they were cool statues. They were ridiculously cheap to make, styrofoam and little tiny plastic dragon toys, with a little bit of glue and paint and some toothpick pieces. Easy peasy for me to put together. Did all 10 of them in probably, why don't you minus the drying time, maybe an hour or two tops. And the idea was they were put together in a room, and the characters had to move them around so that the dragon busts were facing each other where they had the same breath weapon type. The players realized right away, this isn't going to be all that hard. It was just for like Dave said it blatantly out loud of like, all right, how much of this is character knowledge with other players rolling skill checks versus how much is player knowledge, because these guys that I'm gaming with are severe veterans. They have got more experience than myself at the table in some cases. So it's like, all right, I've got Dave, who's been gaming for 30 years at this point in time. Kurt, probably in the same vein. Sophie, who was a writer for TSR back in the day, so that tells you how far her history goes. And these are just some of the players at the table. So I've got quite the collection here that I'm like, I'm going to put this amazing thing out there. So I come down to, when it comes to a puzzle, as you said, you can present an idea. you can give them, if you've got players who are willing to explore and try different things, you can say, here's a scenario and run with it. And if the players are ones who are going to actively try and be willing to, get their hands dirty, so to speak, you might be surprised at what they try. Now, I highly recommend, if you've got people trying things and they're not going in the direction that you have planned, be prepared to just accept what they've got.
Yeah.
And that's a general DM advice. If the players try something that you didn't think of and it sounds cool, let it work. Whether it be a puzzle, whether it be something else. I love it when players think out of the box like that.
Yeah, and I guess to add on that, looking at it that way, there has been a lot of times when players will just create their own puzzles, to be honest with you. Like, I'm sure this has happened to you and probably people in chat too when you're running a game. And, you might just describe, like, the room, and it's like, say, there's a tapestry on the wall, for instance. And like, what's on it? And you might, you might just make it up on the fly. It's like a knight, or, fighting a dragon or whatever. And I've certainly had many times when it's like, well, he described it, it must mean something. And they'll spend, 20, 30 minutes like looking at it, like, are the fibers different? Like, well, maybe it's the colors different. And there's definitely been times when I've like rewarded that by just like, maybe there's some treasure hidden behind it or whatever, just something that comes to mind. But yeah, players will create their own puzzles a lot too, which is hella useful as a DM. And then you get that bonus of them like, wow, that was a great puzzle. You're like, yeah, you guys really did a great job finding that one and solving it.
I like, when you do stuff like that, it's like, you take, like, all right, you want to see my notes on that?
Yeah.
Here you go.
Yeah, right.
Blank sheet of paper.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a lot with it. Now, I would say, number one, go check out Google. I typed in, D&D puzzle 5th edition and just decided to see what would come up.
Mm-hmm.
And the top 2 links on Google was 2 things that led me to multiple puzzle options. And I did, I didn't want to just, come into this thing and really like, I don't use puzzles all that often, like hardcore puzzles where you've got, a structure, skill challenges are aside.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, I should come in with something to talk about beyond the one that I just used recently. And I found that there's quite a number of good options that are out there. So highly recommend, if you don't follow the Nerdarchy newsletter, I will be providing both the links that I found
Mm-hmm.
with puzzles in that, just because I felt it's a good resource and it's worth sharing.
Yeah, I've definitely done that before when you're just like, what, I want to use a puzzle and just like, search. There's tons of cool Reddits and just people's web pages with puzzles. And I'm sure plenty of our friends have probably made products with puzzles in them. Like, nothing coming to mind right now, but I'm sure they're out there.
But, if you're a Harry Potter fan, going in the first book, The Sorcerer's Stone, the 11-year-olds have to navigate their way through a series of puzzles in order to find the stone. And it ends with the Mirror of Erised. Spoiler alert, for the 20-year-old book at this point in time. He looks in the mirror to be able to get the stone. Well, mirrors are incredibly useful, and in several of the different puzzles that I quickly read through, a mirror was a good use.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that several people were commented on of like, I am definitely stealing this, and it might wind up showing up in one of my games somewhere. But in order to continue on or to solve the puzzle, you look in the mirror and it shows you just what you would expect. Everything that's in the room behind you, except there is something that is in the mirror that's in the room, but it's not in the same place.
That reminds me, I have done things like that. So I guess maybe I have done more puzzles. I just have a fuzzy memory of them.
Oh, and when you've been gaming as long as we have, you just start doing things without even really paying a lot of attention to it. So that was one that they recommend. It's like, oh, there's a little knickknack or a statuette that you see in the mirror, but when you look behind you, it's not there. So then it becomes an investigation, of can you find that knickknack in the room and place it in the exact location, in the exact orientation that it is in the mirror, and that, solves the puzzle, opens the door, whatever it is that it takes. You can, not that I've done it yet, but I mean, if you go and look at the different, escape rooms that are out there, they're going to be filled with puzzles and things that are like multi-tiered, that you have to solve, several things before you can find your way out. So you could have something that is along those lines.
Chris Hausnick in the chat has a question, and actually reminded me of something that I have a pretty good answer for him. So sorry to cut you off, but
yeah, no, go for it.
They ask any advice for puzzles with large groups. They have a party of 9 PCs, and involving everyone in puzzles is tricky. It does sound tricky for sure, because it's like, well, unless everybody's doing something, other players could get bored, or maybe some players just don't like puzzles. And it reminded me of one of the out of the box encounters. Actually, I forget the name of it exactly offhand, but it sort of addresses that exact problem by having like different components of the puzzle play to different kind of strengths. So it's like, your brainy, intelligence type characters like figure one thing out, but there was like large objects that needed to be moved, based on what they learn. So that way your brawny, your barbarians and things can get involved. And there was like levers or something to manipulate that required like manual dexterity. So, maybe having like multi-part, like a Rube Goldberg sort of thing, like that they got to put together some sort of contraption, and it just needs everybody's sort of skills to engage.
The thing when looking at puzzles, especially if you've got nine players, you could, as they always say, gauge the room. How many of your players are going to interact with a puzzle? I can tell you that on average, I've got 7 players at the table. Very rarely do they all show up, and I've got hands down one player who he's there for combat. He's getting better. He gets into role playing every now and again, and with this particular character, he's chosen to play something that, while it's still martial, it is still a step away from I just play fighters. So I do try to make sure that I'm putting in enough combat to keep that player intrigued and happy. But there are some days where it's like, I'm sorry, this turned out to be 90% role playing, and it's painful, to see my players unhappy.
Yeah. But as you're describing, I've had those situations too. We all have, where like, well, sometimes you just have that player that like all they like is combat. But then I guess you got to think of it like, well, they keep coming every week, right? And sure, for a session, I mean, I certainly would feel bad as a DM if, like that player just didn't do anything the whole time. But I would just maybe ask them afterwards too. Like maybe they just didn't, maybe that didn't bother them. It's like, yeah, I like the combat when you guys do your talking or whatever, they tune out, but maybe they still are having fun. They still get to fight. And,
I look at it as, even on the nights, especially, in the last campaign where it was, 40, 50 sessions, long. And there were sessions that were in that campaign absolutely 100% role playing, because it was an unstructured campaign. It ran until the story ran its course, but that player keeps coming back. So clearly they were happy.
Yeah, right.
With the DM,
yeah, so if the players keep coming back every week, then you're doing something right. But, and where was it in the chat? It just made me think of something too, like let's see. Split the party. Yeah, that could be a great thing too. I mean, it might take a little DM fiat on your part, but say you got 6 players and like 3 of them really like fighting, or 2 of them really like fighting, and 4 like puzzles. It's like, well, maybe they get to a point where like a portcullis drops, and in order to get the party back together, they gotta, you can do that splitting up. So
you've got Blake's comment here that I was actually trying to do this in my last session, but it says, since we're talking about puzzles today, what ideas does everyone have about puzzles and combat, the unwinnable combat, how to make it fun, how to make it fair, just food for thought. So as I described last night, I had this room where I had a crystalline structure that I had made that was kind of like the Archmage's, computer, based off of like Superman's, fortress. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be their thing. And the smart characters are going to have to go and interact with this thing and, try to figure out how to open up and make this be the end. And the players who wanted to fight or would only just fight would sit there and be able to fight the monsters that would just keep coming until they dealt with it. Well, the players made some choices, and it wound up going sideways. So it wound up just being all combat, and then all just hand wave that they figured it out. But I actually do like the thought of, you've got a puzzle to solve, and until the puzzle is solved, monsters will just keep coming. Whether you've got a demonic portal, whether you have got just an onrushing army, whatever it takes. There are many ways, a multitude of things that you can do that just represent the unlimited source of combat, where you just have things keep coming.
That made me think of the chat last night, and Blake sort of clarified too. He said, he didn't want to force solutions. He wanted to think about thoughts of like making a deadly encounter puzzle seem fun and fair. I thought about this while we were on the chat last night, but it didn't come up in the chat. I was just thinking about it. But, when we were talking about, we kind of touched on, like making skill checks to kind of give players hints, right? Because really, a lot of times puzzles, you're challenging the players, right? And we were kind of getting into that, but it made me think of a game like Tomb Raider, the original. I don't know if you ever played that, right?
I know of it, but I haven't really.
So, the protagonist, Lara Croft, is like, she's very knowledgeable about history and archaeology and stuff. And she's in an unknown place, and she's encountering all these devious puzzles. But she also, like, it's in her knowledge base, and she lives in that world, right? So as a player, you're puzzled trying to figure it out. But there are things that the character is knowledgeable about. So I don't think it's too untoward, like when you were talking about your trap, like, let him, if it's really struggling, because we're DMs, we think like, oh yes, I got this really cool encounter, and like if they have to solve this puzzle, and if they don't, like these waves of enemies coming, they might just not solve it. Maybe it's just not. So it's just like you can give them hints,
that's what I would say is like, if you are going to design your own puzzle, if you're going to have this thing that's supposed to challenge them, give them a series of anywhere from 3 to 5 hint options. Set your, all right, if they make a this skill check at this DC, they can get this. So you've got Arcana, you've got history, you've got nature, you've got religion, you've got perception. Just grabbing 5 random skills that most parties, somebody's usually got. If you can get those checks and set them at staggering DCs, whatever you think is fair and yet achievable for the characters who are going to have those skills. Okay, boom, they'll get some kind of hint. And if you're doing a puzzle that is not time based at all, there's no combat that's going on, there is no deadly clock behind them, let them figure it out. And maybe 5-10 minutes of real world time of them discussing, you can say, okay, make this check, and see if somebody can, get the next hint.
And to build on that too, it's like, well, like we've talked about many times of, like information. It's like, well, if you want them to know the information, don't tie it to a skill check. So even in that situation, it's like, well, they could still fail. So, I'm thinking though, like if your puzzle's built into a combat, like they have to do X to stop the combat, meaning there's still action economy and danger going on, and they're really struggling, and they failed those rolls and stuff, then you can still give them a hint. The DM is, you're not like an adversarial, it goes without saying, force in the world. You're trying to help the players tell their story. So, your purpose of a puzzling combat encounter isn't to, wipe the party because they didn't solve your puzzle. So it can still be challenging and exciting if they have to do things during the combat. So you might even just, and maybe your players. If you play all the time, you're like, well, I want to use puzzles, but they're not really into them. So just make a situation where you can just tell them, like, look, you're going to have to do this, that, and the other thing in order to, while you're fighting. I mean, that's nothing wrong with that. I mean, your goal is for everybody to just have fun. So it's like, it would just be an exciting, puzzling combat encounter, and they could know what they had to do. The challenge is just to do it.
So that's another thing that you can do in your prep phase, is to have, instructionals or ideas that a player a character has come up with.
Yeah, have an NPC tell them, like, if you're going into this place, you should know.
No, what I was going to say is, you could just, write them up, print them out, however you want to do it, and assign, I think Dave's character would think of this idea. And if no one comes up with it, hand that player a note.
Yeah.
And therefore it's not, while it's possible that, the table or some of the table are seeing you pass that note, they don't know exactly what's on it. You might be telling them exactly what to do. You might be giving them a hint, but ultimately you're not breaking the story.
Yeah.
It's the character who's now saying,
right.
"Oh my God, try this."
Yeah.
Oh, did you try to bend the bars? Did you try to lift the portcullis? Whatever suggestions are coming out there, you're not breaking the mold as the DM. Mm-hmm. The character gets to say, and deliver, the clue or what have you.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit more fun.
Yeah, that is a great idea, and that kind of answers that guy 101's question of how to put a puzzle in a game where players are more interested in combat. It's sort of like ease into it and like give them the tools they need to solve it. It's just the actual implementing the tasks to solve it is the fun, and maybe they'll be like, "Wow, that was pretty cool," and then next time you can maybe just build on that a little bit more.
Start off with something that just seems blatantly obvious. When I designed, my little dragon head trap, I wrote it, and it was very much designed that, it easily could be, done two different ways. And I wanted to do it because I'm like, well, if I create the statues and I've got them now in my, scenery arsenal, they could be something that's there as, hey, it's just something that's in the hallway and it's cool terrain that I can put on the, on the battlefield. Yay, great. It could be a hazard of, well, when you walk by it, it breathes, whatever have you. But you've got it as in the line of they have to face each other with their opposite of breath weapon. They could have to get put in hierarchy order or power order, gold down to copper and, red all the way down to white, and they have to be exact. You could do, several different iterations with it. And I had no idea what they were going to try. And as soon as I put the thing there and described the scene, the only issue was, all right, you've got brass, bronze, and copper. Which actual thing on the battle map actually represents which ones? Because there is not a huge amount of deviation, and I did not find a good brass color when I was at the paint store. Now, I know there's a lot of mini painters out there who cringe when I say that I tend to use craft paints more than the higher stuff, but I tend to get four times the amount of paint for the price. So, Hey,
and those look cool. I mean, the players had fun. You got a cool little dungeon, terrain that you made and everything. It's like, it might not be hanging in a gallery, but it looks cool, right?
I'm happy with what's here.
Yeah.
I will quick throw a nod out. We have Scott from Arcania Workshop in the chat. He said, hey to Doug and myself. So hey, right back at you. He's actually he's doing me a solid. That craft project that we had talked about, a couple weeks ago on the Patreon chat, he's going to supply me with my missing components.
Oh, okay, cool.
So I'll be happy to see when those things are able to get to me. So Thank you, Scott. You're awesome.
Another place I often get ideas for puzzles, and maybe tangentially a puzzle, it's just like video games. I mean, think of, and this could be an answer to the I forgot who asked about like the players like combat and stuff more. I mean, a puzzle could just be like a door with 3 gems above it, and they just have to find like the lever that lights it up. You know what I mean? And it's like, sure, it's like, is that really a puzzle? I guess it's a puzzling situation, and that involves like exploring elsewhere in the dungeon and fighting some monsters and looking around to find the activation for this thing. So Simon Says is another classic one in games where it's just like, oh, these icons light up, and then you got to touch them, and then So,
do you ever? I don't know what you watch, but do you ever watch the guys who do Epic NPC Man?
Mm-mm.
Okay. I forget what the name of their channel is, but like they've got, all of the NPC Man, but then they've got some other things as well. And the one video, it was like presented with like one of the ridiculousness of puzzles and that kind of stuff that show up in some RPG games, and it basically had like a trio of symbols, and it's like you will never guess what the proper order of things are, and literally when you've got 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
There are only so many iterations of a 3-digit code that you can use when you've only got 3 symbols. So like he tried each one until he got it, and it's like, oh no, you figured it out. It was really pathetic. So, like you could literally do something along those lines, and okay, well, you put some kind of consequence or combat that they have to deal with if they get it wrong, and see how they respond to something like that. Something that is literally impossible not to solve if they're actually attempting.
Yeah.
Is it 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 3, or 2, 2, 3, 1? That's it.
One thing that comes to mind as we're talking about this too, and like several people in the chat and I myself was thinking it too, is just like, like, well, what if I do if my players don't like puzzles and this and that? Don't use them. I mean, you could just ask players, like I've done that before, like, do you guys like that? Or afterwards, like, hey, do you like those kind of things? Do you like puzzles? And sure, there's something to be said for like, well, you're the GM, you want to have fun too, right? But you also have a literally unlimited amount of resources as a DM, so it's like, well, unless puzzles is the only way that you're going to have fun, then just don't use them, right?
Yeah,
it's not required.
That is super solid. You've got every pillar can be broken down into a multitude of things. I don't think I'm always the best at being super descriptive. I don't use voices all that often unless like I really feel an NPC deserves a voice.
Sure.
There's certain voices that I do better than others.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I stick to my strengths, and that's what you should do. And if like, okay, well, my players don't like combat versus one dude. It's not interesting. It's not as much fun. Then don't do that kind of combat. Oh, my players don't like long, boring slogs across across terrain. Oh, we got to do the travel episode where we have meaningless combat that's all random encounters. Don't do those. I've taken them out of my game. I don't care. Combat needs to mean something. Most of the time now when I run, if there's going to be a combat, it's attached to the story, or like there's a reason for it being there, even if the players aren't seeing it. I might, tell me what you fought. Tell me how things went. And I've had players narrate to me a random battle that they fought, and it build things in. There's sometimes potential rewards when stuff like that happens. It's like, all right, well, this is the loot that you found. This is what you uncovered by doing so. Because I think combat isn't as much fun to me anymore. I don't want to say I've evolved, because I don't want to insult any of the
your tastes have changed.
Yes, there you go. My tastes have changed. I'm much more into the story and the role playing, and like it's ridiculous. I'm enjoying just playing make believe, with this game.
I know what you mean, man. I think it's so funny. I almost look at like the word D&D as just an excuse to like say, like when we're little kids and you're in school, you're like, hey, you want to come over after school and play? And it's like, you didn't really have anything specific, but it sounds weird when you're a 42-year-old man. So it's just like, oh, if I have a thing that I'm playing, then it's okay. But yeah, I'm the same way. It's like I just get swept away in the story and along with the players. One thing I was thinking, so I almost always is just like theater of the mind, right? Like I usually play, just on Skype or whatever with my friends because everybody moved away. And puzzles can be difficult that way too, because a lot of times it has to do like visual things help, like your dragon heads, or like if there's somebody had mentioned like a floor tile puzzle, and you can describe it and everything, but it's like it's kind of hard to visualize. So in that sense, maybe I probably do more puzzles than I am thinking, but they, like you said, they turn more into like skill challenges, right?
Right.
And that's a great thing too, because like then you get to use all those skills that you might not get to use all the time. So I mean, like I said, you could describe like, oh yeah, all the tiles are different colors, or whether it's a chess thing, like somebody said, those classic things.
I'll throw out there the Dead Aussie Gamer, clarified the YouTube channel I was talking about. It's Viva La Dirt. They're the guys from New Zealand. That's absolutely what I was talking about.
Really?
I do watch all of their stuff. Now, it usually shows up on my Facebook feed, and I wind up watching like a handful at a time. I've seen some of them, countless number of times. They're amusing, and they're usually pretty short. So go check them out if you like them. When you're talking about doing it as how do you know whether it's a puzzle or how, like, you could literally like in my case, the players were essentially investigating, because they were forced into it, a demi-plane that was created by the adversary that they're facing, or that they had just killed, ironically. But like, if they aren't aware, like, is there a magic mouth? Is there anything that can issue the challenge? Can it give them some kind of instructional? Maybe if you lead things up in advance, like, you're going to go, examine the Fortress of Doom. Okay, well, beware the hidden staircase. It leads to, this dastardly puzzle that, few have ever solved, or none have ever solved, whatever. It leads them to, well, they've got the clue, and if it's been a session or 3 or 5 since they were told of that warning, it's like, you found a hidden staircase. Well, that reminds you that the vizier at the castle told you that at the bottom of the staircase was this incredibly hard puzzle. Now, and it might prompt them to remember. Maybe they remember when they find a hidden staircase, but by putting it back out there, you've got the idea that, okay, they realize that there's something for them to do, as opposed to, I've seen times where players are like twiddling their thumbs because they don't realize that they need to act, that they need to do something. So when I described the room with the dragons, the dragon bust statues, there were 10 statues in the room. There were no doors, so they could not get out. And I described that the floor on next to all of the statues was heavily scratched and scraped.
That's classic.
The statues had been moved.
Sure, and that's about as classic as like there's scorch marks on the ground. Like there's a fire trap.
Exactly. Yeah. So like it, I did not feel that there was any genius that was put into what I did. It just seemed right, and I didn't need to narrate them. Okay, guys, you need to think, you need to do something. They heard my description and they said, okay, let's start thinking, let's start talking. One player's like, can I make an Arcana check? Can I, what do I know about dragons? Like, they put together the clues pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. That was when you said that, was reminding me of like the Tomb Raider thing. I was like, well, she's doing puzzles that are related to things she knows, and that's what the characters are doing too. They live in that world, so and again, I know I talk about it all the time, like tools and all that stuff, but those are things where, like, look at your character's tools. That might be the key to maybe not solving the puzzle, but like knowing something weird about it. Like if it's like I mentioned earlier, a puzzle with like a tapestry, it's like maybe the guy with weaver's tools is like, there's something weird about that, tapestry, and right? Like they would know about like threads and stuff, and they could examine it. One thing I want to mention, so we're about halfway through, I think it's a good time to mention, we had an update from the Kickstarter today, which I don't know if everybody in there is aware of that, but we had a pretty successful Kickstarter for out-of-the-box encounters. There's 55 encounters, and quite a few of them are puzzling. We got the badge levels all worked out now through the Pledge Manager, so you can get your artifact or legendary level badges there. I'll put a link in the description to the update. You can go check that out. We got some more art that we shared over there as well. But I've used several of the puzzles in that book, and I can tell you they are quite engaging. So that's another resource you can do, and a lot of those things are just like, boop, drop it right in your game. So
yeah, I love what we've come up with, for that project.
Would you consider coin flip a puzzle? I mean, there's not really a solution to it, but
well, I mean, it's not a straightforward puzzle. It's not really a skill challenge, but I mean, there's definitely elements that require you, to think. It requires ingenuity, and thus it falls into, the definition that I read at the beginning.
Yeah, so that's true. So maybe our conception of puzzles can be expanded too. It's just like, well, like you said, if you're not fighting and you're not interacting with somebody, and you're not just exploring.
I mean, technically, one of the fights that I had done in my kids' game, technically, falls into, a puzzle range.
That's a great example. Real quick before you tell your story. But yeah, looking at kids' games and shows and stuff, that's a great way to think of puzzles. And I don't know why I just thought of one of the My Little Pony episodes. Yes, I watched it. My girlfriend's daughter's 10. But that's a good way to kind of like make an interesting combat. They fought like a manticore or something, and of course, they're not going to like slay the beast on a kid's cartoon, but it had like the thorn in its paw, and they solved that. So that's kind of a puzzling situation too. It's like maybe your combat can turn into a puzzle when they realize, like, look, this thing doesn't want to fight us to the death. There's something wrong here.
Kids shows are great for a lot of
because they solve a lot of their conflicts by because like I said, they're not going to like slay everything in their path. Right.
So I had this awesome.
Oh my god, that is awesome.
That is Mud Gullet, the Froghemoth miniature from Reaper. My somewhat muddy paint job for that guy. But I'm like, all right, well, again, another scenario where I have a miniature, have no idea when I'm going to use it. So I'm like, you know what? This thing is far too powerful for them to kill. I'm going to make them fight it. But here's the caveat. They're not allowed to kill it. It's the worshipped totem spirit of, a Grung tribe or, what have you, but it's sick. And it's, and it's killed a number of their villagers. They still worship it, but something's happened to it. So the idea was the adventurers just had to keep it occupied while the Grung go in to do their ritual, and they had to keep the Grung alive throughout this whole process. So if too many Grung died, they'd fail, and they'd have to like retreat, heal up, and try again tomorrow if they've got enough willing, ritual participants.
Right.
So it was a timed thing that was based off of, not the players' dice rolls. The players had their actions of what they could do, and it was interesting to see how combat could be vastly different when you're not actually trying to kill the thing, but to keep it alive. It was really amusing, and in its own way, it was testing the ingenuity of the players at the table. It showed, especially the kids, but as well as the adult that's in that game, that not all combat is about killing something. Right. So I enjoy that whole let's take a turn to the left or a turn to the right and approach this situation differently. So like the more things that I can do like that, I feel like it's just one more thing to like, all right, I've taken that step as a DM. What's next for me to do? Where can I go from here? Because I really feel like I need to keep challenging myself. And everything that I do, here, everything that we talk about, I feel like, oh, I don't feel strongly enough about this topic. To the research.
Yep.
How do I present this in a way that makes me knowledgeable enough that I feel like, that people can and should listen to what we have to say.
One thing I would also say too is, like I tend to forget this, so I have to remind myself, like when I'm DMing or whatever, is like, sometimes you try something and it doesn't seem to be working out, or it'll turn into a slog or whatever. You can just tell your players, like, okay, just be honest, like, look, can we just take a break? This isn't going the way I thought, right? I mean, they're your friends. I've done that before. Where you're like, or if it's a puzzle, just like kind of just be like, look, guys, I tried to do this, it didn't work out. I mean, there's no shame. You don't have, you're not, get judged, I mean, maybe a little bit by your friends, but I'm trying to say, like, if you try something and it's just like you thought it was cool, but you look around the table and nobody's really enjoying themselves, including you, and it's a slog, just work through it. Just be like, okay, let's wrap this up, or or if you don't want it to be that like overt, you can just like do something in the game that kind of like circumvents the thing that's really holding them up.
You've got a number of tools at your disposal. As the DM, you ultimately always have that gigantic pause button.
Yeah,
whether I've done it. Like I need to step back. You've got the excuse of I need to use the restroom.
Mm-hmm.
I need some fresh air. I need just a moment to think here. Hey guys, I wasn't expecting this to go in this direction. Can you give me a minute? You could always, especially if you've got someone at the table with a little bit more experience than yourself. Especially if you're a new GM, you could be like, hey, look, can I talk to your character aside for a moment? And you can pull that player off to the side, like, look, I'm really stuck here.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice? For a long time, Dave was really my only real mentor when it came to gaming. And, for much of our early gaming, Dave was a very adversarial GM. And it was, like, he wasn't out to kill us, but it wasn't, the style of gaming that he has now, where it is more about the story. And he's not out to kill people. He doesn't care if your character lives or dies like I do. But
he's not designing things to be extreme, like deadly on purpose, like constantly. Yeah.
But I mean, as with most people who do this for a long time, things change, and just like I said earlier, my tastes have altered as to what I enjoy doing. So when I am prepping material, I'm looking, especially for my current game, I did something for one session, and the players are like, you now have to do this all the time. So now, like, beyond the fact that I'm creating essentially a new monster, at least one new monster for every single adventure that I'm planning, I then have to craft something as well.
Oh, they want you to craft the stuff every time.
So I had done a goblin village,
mm-hmm.
and I literally took like little deodorant caps and popsicle sticks and hay and made little goblin huts.
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember that.
And I had them like, oh, this is amazing, and then I wound up making plants and mimics and a variety of different crossbred orc mutations that were all in this wizard's tower. Which I think, just throw everything else aside, the man-trap mimics were the solid win of the day, especially because the half-orc is like, there's bear traps here, I'm totally going to use them. It was supposed to be an after-the-fact encounter, and he's like, nope, I'm using them. And it just it just started biting him right away.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. I loved it, and I purposefully put a real, or not, like a this is what it looks like before it turns into a mimic, but then I made the mimic, figure as well. So I took the fake one out.
Oh wow! So I didn't know that. So you made the traps, and then you made like the awakened mimic sort of version of that same thing.
Yeah, you talk for 2 seconds.
All
right,
cool.
Right over here on the shelf.
Cool. Yeah, he's a crafty guy. So yeah, I mean, and like Ted said, every session you're learning on what you did before too. So it's like, well, you might want to challenge yourself by doing something that you're not used to, like doing puzzles, and it doesn't work out. And maybe not the very next session, but you learn and see what worked and what didn't, and then you just try again later. I mean, you just keep playing with your friends and having fun.
So I had taken a, there's a variety of different, Mage Knight or Hero Clicks or whatever, and it is click bases.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's the mimic. And you can see like the teeth kind of sticking out there. But, remove the tongue, remove the eyes. And I just had the thing in silver with the teeth, and they were just kind of like leaning off to the side, like, oh, they're just over here. And I love it when my players are willing to use the stuff that's there.
Yeah.
But this was the trap. Oh, you went and touched it, so
they just thought it was just like cool dungeon dressing that you'd made, huh?
Yeah, so they thought it was just
that's a great trick.
And there's really not a whole lot to this. Like I put hot glue on the large tongue depressor to be the saliva. There's little droplets of glue that represent the different eyes. It's not a fantastic by a lot of the crafters and paint job people.
Yeah, but it's cool.
But I totally love it, and it was an absolute hit of the night, even though it turned on the players. But it was.
Well, that's the sign of a good game and a good story too. And it's like even the things that were detrimental to them, the players thought were cool, right?
So, like, I keep having to, like, all right, well, what am I going to do here? So beyond crafting 10 dragon statues, beyond crafting the crystalline structure.
Yeah, you really have. You've been making stuff every session, like pretty neat, little things. Huh?
So I'm not entirely sold on where the campaign is going at the moment. I had a little bit of inspiration to kind of throw them to the left before they get back to town.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see what winds up transpiring there. But,
are they based in Griffingiff?
No, they're in.
They're like far from there, aren't they?
Yeah, they're in they're in Himrick, which also has the nickname of Hydra.
Is that where the Hydra is on the wall?
That is where the
stone Hydra is?
The stone Hydra is, which was from a session 15 years ago.
Yeah,
where we've shared that story before.
That's a great story.
Ryan's character used a scroll of stone to flesh on this creature that was attacking the town, and at some point in time, probably won't be this game, but who knows, that the statues, somebody's going to cast stone to flesh on it, and this thing's going to come out angry.
Oh, nice.
But the joke is out of the game that every time somebody discusses it, the statue just gets bigger. But I just recall this story, or like the description that Dave gave.
Mm-hmm.
That this thing was big enough that it just stepped over the walls.
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, its legs have to clear a 10-foot wall. Like that's the way I envision this thing. So it's got to be, 40, 50 feet tall. This thing is massive. But Dave's like, nah, it's only like, 20 foot tall, maybe 30, But I'm like, that's not what I'm seeing here. So
what could be a great puzzling, just like location, basically, like a giant slayer. You think about it, like, they're not built to be puzzles, but like opening the door would be difficult. Climbing stairs, I mean, if they're like giant size things, that could be a puzzling scenario. So maybe that's another way people can like sort of ease in like overcoming puzzling situations for players that like maybe they just like combat all the time. just navigating this place.
That is something that it really boggles my mind. Giants in Fantasyscape, especially when you look at how giants were considered in earlier editions.
Yeah,
these things were like 60 feet tall.
Yeah, I like my giant. I usually imagine the giants are much bigger than Like, what is a hill giant like? I mean, they're still pretty big. I think it was a hill giant like 16 to 18 feet tall or something like that. Still large, but
I thought hill giants were only like 13.
Oh, really? Yeah, you're probably right. But yeah, I like to imagine like the doorknob of a giant's thing would be like 10-foot diameter thing. I mean, they're big. So just like getting around the place would be difficult. I'm thinking like Jack and the Beanstalk, like when you see all those cartoons that just like take like a cup or something and like trap them in there. Like that's how big they are.
So, and to me, there is interest in that aspect. Dave, who really loves Viking mythology, and giants definitely are very much engrossed in runes and all of that stuff that's there. So like Dave can get into it. I've got a shelf that is full of giant miniatures, but I don't see how to use them. Like they're not all of that interesting or appealing to me. I'm baffled. I would love to do that mini me adventure. Like, all right, you are super tiny in comparison to how big these stairs are, and just navigating around becomes the problem. And no, you got to deal with a rat. Well, a rat that's bigger than you or as big as you, that's a fight. That's a terrible fight. So like you can do fun things like that, and that's great for a level 1 or level 2 party where you can't even conceive of fighting the giant because it literally could just step on you.
Yeah,
you're done.
That's where you got to get all Shadow of Colossus on. You ever seen that game?
No.
It's like you're fighting giants that are like like 1,000 feet tall, and you got to like climb up them and hit certain spots and stuff like that. Yeah, I think I think everybody's got a giant campaign in them. It's just like just nailing that just right. Seems challenging,
right?
But fun. Speaking of campaigns, this is a little off topic, but man, I want to run like a bounty hunter campaign after watching The Mandalorian this morning. So bad. My God, did you watch that?
No, is that only on
Disney Plus?
Yeah, I have not bit the bullet yet. It's gonna happen.
Yeah,
but
it's awesome.
I have to. I mean, as huge Boba Fett fan as I am, and I have no idea. And please don't give me any spoilers. I have no idea how they're taking it, where exactly it fits in the storyline, and I'm willing to accept whatever it's got to say is. But in my little brain, there is a portion of my brain that refuses to accept anything that has to do with Django and Boba Fett. Boba Fett is still Jasper Muriel in my mind, and I'm happy with that.
Wow, that's deep cuts, man. Really you read the comics and all the extended universe.
That is where I'm at with Boba Fett.
Sure,
he is not just some guy who my dad did this first. No, screw that shit.
Well, I only saw the one episode, and it didn't. You shan't be disappointed in that regard.
Well, I am certain. I've seen what they've been doing, and I've seen the teaser trailer, and I'm impressed enough to be like, yeah, I'm gonna need to do this at some point in time. It might not be until I hear a second thing that I really need to watch, but once I do it, I'm in it.
I mean, it's probably not
Disney's. You've got all the Star
Yeah.
Wars,
Oh, good. Yeah. Disney. Yeah, it's pretty dope. I guess. I mean, I think you and I are a lot like that, though. It's like, man, so many things that I see and hear throughout the day. I'm just like, that would be a cool D&D adventure. So yeah, I watched that. And I'm like, oh man, like have all the players be bounty hunters and they all get hired for the same job and show up at the same place, the first adventure. And it's got the cool concept of like, I always like having an organization for characters to be part of. Because it's like, well, there's an easy way. It's like, that's how they know each other. They can get their adventures that way. And like, especially at the Guildmaster's Guide with the actual like breakdown of like, as you rise up, you get these certain things. You're a big Star Wars fan. Is Beskar Steel like an important part of Mandalorian lore that came up?
I'm not that deep. I'm not familiar with that name. I've read a handful of comic books. I've read a lot of the novels, especially the tales. I think if you're totally off topic, but as we wind into our last few minutes, but
I'll bring it back.
IG-88. In Tales of the Bounty Hunter, super awesome that he was the brain of the Death Star within minutes before it exploded. The second Death Star, I should say.
But to bring it back around, I have actually played with my home group in quite a while because everybody's just been busy for the summer. But we're going to be playing next week, so I'm looking forward to doing some puzzling things. We're also going to be hanging out with some friends. We're all traveling down to my neck of the woods, sort of, this week. So I bet you we'll have some cool puzzling adventures.
I have no idea what exactly is going to happen this weekend, but we're going to have a severe amount of gaming nerd cred all over the place, and it's not even for a convention.
No, it's gonna be fun.
Myself, Nerdarchy Dave, DM Scotty, Gareth from the DMG Info, and the two of them are quest givers, as well as Jake from Mini Terrain Domain. We are all gathering in one place because Gareth, who is normally not in this country, has come over. They just did Mace last weekend, and he's hanging out with his business partner, DM Scotty, and they invited us to come over and hang. And I'm like super excited to get to meet people for the first time. I've got long relationship online with Jake and with Scotty, and
you guys have been known Scotty for like a long time, almost since the channel started, right? Like he's like an old timey.
Dave has known Scotty longer than myself.
Like he was he was making videos like when you guys first started too, right?
Oh yeah,
he's been around for a while.
Before.
And Earth.
I actually had Scotty had done these little Necronomicon
that's cool.
Little bookmark things. So not bookmarks, but bookshelf knickknacks. And he had them resin cast and painted and had sold them. So I was a fan and I purchased it before Scotty even really knew who I was.
Oh, okay.
So after I started gaming with him, I'm like, hey, I gotta let you know I still have this, and it sits on the Nerdarchy shelf. It's right there within reach all the time. But I'm super excited for this weekend to get to see so many awesome people in real life.
Probably play some cool games, and even you guys. I mean, I don't get to see you and Dave in person all that often, so that's cool. I never met Jake before, so I'm looking forward to that. Mini Terrain Domain. He seems like a really cool guy.
So Andy Hughes, DM Scotty is the truth. I've stolen tons of his stuff.
Like all DMs do, man. That's the way to do it. And to bring it back around to puzzles, steal those too.
It's not stealing. You are inspired by. Even if you are using word for word what they say, you are inspired so much by what is there that you can't bear to change what perfection has been presented to you. So you use it carte blanche. So we say, steal from everywhere, but I am always seeking inspiration for my game. So don't steal, be inspired by.
And for the DM, the biggest the greatest puzzle we always have is how can I really make this fun for my players? So the best way to do that is just to keep playing and running games. And if you never ran a game before, give it a shot, because it's probably not as hard as you think. That's not a hard puzzle to solve, of just throwing stuff in front of your players and seeing the fun times that you have together.
It is fun. I've had new players who are completely engrossed with the idea, and they're like, I'm going to run my first adventure. And in my kids game right now, there's my 13-year-old nephew, my 11-year-old son, and occasionally Dave's son, who turns 19 at the end of this month. and I ask of the three of them who's going to run the game first, and it's my 13-year-old nephew.
Oh yeah.
Down, you know, I imagine that he will, if he doesn't already have them, he'll be getting, the core books for Christmas. He would have gotten them for his birthday, but I think he's saving up for a laptop.
Okay.
But he is already like plotting and planning. He's got
nice.
ideas. My son, he wants no parts of it at the moment. My nephew, Dave's son, David, he wants no parts of it. It's like, yeah, you might get around to it, but I'm not going to push anybody into the DM chair.
No.
We'll wait and see. If it were, if I were Nerdarchy Dave, I would, I'd push him into it because he's an adult now. But my son's still got many years of gaming before I feel like he's quite ready. As a player, he's too rambunctious at the table.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to get him calmed down to be able to handle the proper course of action.
Sounds like you have a puzzle to solve yourself there, huh?
Indeed.
Well, I guess with that, we're right up to the time. So yeah, I think we had a good time talking about puzzles. I hope we helped out the people in the chat who had questions, and they helped us out as well because they had suggestions, as they always do, because we have the best community out there. You guys are awesome. So yeah, I guess we'll be back next Monday for our Patreon exclusive live chat, and then next Tuesday, of course, to hang out with you folks here.
I think next week is going to be, Dave and myself. You'll get your week off.
Oh, that's right. Oh, that's when my group's playing. Yeah, because I told them I got a week off. We can play on a Monday. So I will bring back tales of puzzles from that for you folks.
So with that, until next time,
stay nerdy.